My name is Jason Fernandes, and I'm here to talk about mechanics and magic of decentralized funding. So I started off around 2013 buying Bitcoin, back when Bitcoin was at a mere $13. Today, Bitcoin is at $66,000. And sometime around October 2021, I was recruited to be Chief Business Officer at a company called NFT Technologies. And NFT Technologies eventually went public, both in Canada and in Europe. And so around 2021, I started off with an investment of about $325,000. And over a period of just 30 days, I turned that into $6.25 million, the all-time high. So how did I do that? I did that through the magic of tokens and tokenomics. Now, what are tokens, right? Tokens are a new way to fractionalize value. Whereas tokenomics is the art and science of turning digital tokens into assets with real-world value. So why is tokenomics magic? In the Middle Ages, the most sought-after form of magic was something known as alchemy. And that's, of course, turning baser metals into gold. In crypto, the blockchain serves as almost an alchemic laboratory where we look at sort of complex equations and try to figure out what is the best tokenomics for this particular crypto that will really allow it to successfully create and maintain value. So some background. I started off, like I mentioned, back in 2013, and around the time I got involved in NFT Technologies, which went public, we really invested in a lot of projects that were in the lead up to their going public, basically trading publicly on the Web3 markets. And over that period of time, I learned a lot about what would make a cryptocurrency extremely valuable. So I spoke to over 1,000 companies over a short 7-month period. Many of them were pitching me for investment, and so we're trying to figure out which were good companies in our portfolio. As I mentioned, the company went public eventually. I also had a dual role at IBC Group, which is our sister company, where we basically advise a lot of companies that were in the lead up to their public sale. And so what I learned a lot about was what gives cryptocurrencies value. And in a word, that's utility. So the main question for a company to ask itself is, does it have a business in the first place? The next step is really, can the company structure themselves in a way whereas the value that is accrued goes towards a token as opposed to the equity of the company? And so that really requires looking at what the company does and how to turn the benefit that it does, a utility, into tokens, and how to lock that value into tokens. So besides utility, which is probably the most important part, obviously the company has to have a business in order to be remotely useful, you also have supply, distribution, and incentives. Now supply would be how many tokens are there? What is the total number of tokens? Distribution is, of course, how those tokens are distributed over time. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in each section. Also incentives. What is the incentives that are built into these tokenomics that would make it valuable over time? So supply. Like I mentioned, the main question is how many tokens are there in the system, the total number of tokens, and how are those distributed, right? So mainly supply, essentially cryptocurrency works on a supply and demand curve, right? So no matter what the demand is, that is divided by the supply. So if you have a really large supply, it really doesn't matter what your demand is going to be because the token will regardlessly be worth basically nothing because you have such a large supply of tokens, which is why you have to look at the maximum number of tokens. Bitcoin is a great example. Bitcoin has a maximum of 21 million tokens, and it'll never go more than that. So whatever demand, new demand that's created for Bitcoin, that gets locked within a significant amount of tokens. There's 21 million, and no more of those tokens will ever be created. Another really, really important point when it comes to what gives cryptocurrency value is distribution. So that involves how, when, and to whom are these cryptocurrency tokens distributed. So if you look at this graph, this actually looks at over the 5-year scale how these tokens are distributed. Really, you can kind of see how that increases over time. And what you want to know is you don't want to see too much of that supply front-loaded. Right? So you can also see kind of how these have all broken up, right? So you can see how much percentage is given to the backers, how much percentage is given to, let's say, early investors, the team. These things are really important because you could create a system of tokenomics where essentially the team gets most of the tokens and only a small number of tokens are available for everybody else. That's pretty much an unethical way of creating tokenomics because basically that front loads the team with a lot of essentially money and really everybody else is just sort of scraping by. So what you want to look at when you're evaluating a cryptocurrency is sort of this pie chart. How much goes to the team? How much ends up on exchanges, how much of that, and how does that supply increase? So you might have a really small amount of that supply at the beginning, but over time that might increase because more and more of those tokens are vested. So usually these tokens are locked for a certain period. So team tokens are often locked for anywhere from 3 to 5 years, sometimes less, sometimes 2 years. And again, those are some of the things that you want to evaluate. You want to see whether the members of the team are sufficiently motivated to continue doing what they're doing. Because if those tokens vest in, let's say, a year, why would that team, keep working on the project? So you want to make sure that they're working on it for at least a few years and they're getting those tokens over that time. And you also want to make sure that most of those tokens are not concentrated within a single person or like maybe even a small number of people. The reason being that those people can all sell the tokens at the same time and basically the token is valueless. So what gives crypto value? The other thing, sort of the third main thing, are the incentives. So you want to generate, somebody who's investing would basically generate tokens that are, so rather invest in tokens where the incentives are aligned with the people that are getting tokens. So a good example is Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin works on what's known as a proof of work consensus. And that essentially involves as Bitcoin is mined, which is really the process of people processing Bitcoin transactions. They receive parts of the Bitcoin that are mined for their effort in mining that Bitcoin. So that's known as proof of work. So what that's doing is it's aligning the incentives of the people that own the token and the people that are, let's say, creating the token, and how is that token come into being in the first place. Another example is proof of stake. Ethereum, which is another popular cryptocurrency, that works on a proof of stake. So for example, you stake a certain amount of Ethereum and then you have certain benefits due to staking. Another is network growth incentives. So this comes down to how is a token constructed to where it benefits those that are like, let's say, using the token. Why will they let's say mine? So for example, I mentioned mining Bitcoin results in the person who mines actually receiving some of these coins. So network growth incentives are things like airdrops, where essentially you might give out a certain number of tokens to key supporters in order to sort of blow up the token, the interest in the token, and also referrals. So for example, what are the key referrals that people are making? Are they referring other people to, let's say, purchase that token? So a lot of people construct their token in such a way where new people that get that token are somehow getting some sort of benefit for referring new investors to that token. So that comes down to sort of the real benefit of creating a token that is useful for everybody, both the people that own the token, the people that created the token, the people that are using the token. So essentially all these things come together to build a token that is useful. Another thing that people use when it comes to incentives is governance and voting, right? So a lot of cryptocurrencies when you own them, you have the ability to perform and to basically be part of the governance of that token. So for example, you can say they have voting, right? So you can then say, hey, this is not a good use of the funds that the company has made, and we want to vote for, let's say, them to invest in a DAO. This is very similar to, for example, owning shares and having voting power, right? So you have some say in how those tokens are distributed, right? And this is really, really important. A lot of people, a lot of companies that build cryptocurrency tokens, literally the entire utility of the token is to be able to make decisions on how the funds from that token that are raised are then spent. A good example is a DAO, a Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So that basically allows essentially a group of people to decide how the funds for that token are spent, right? So let's say you have a token that's launched, they're doing really well, but let's say they want to go to a conference and they want to basically, spend a significant money on that conference. So then they might put that to a vote, and the people with, let's say, more tokens or a certain amount of voting power are then able to go on and make that decision and say, okay, look, this amount of money for this particular event is a useful use of the token. So recently, we had an event called Token 2049. You had a lot of companies that exhibited there, and then it became a question of, is this a good use of the company's funds? And so governance allows people to vote. So these are really the key components of what makes a token valuable. You look at the incentives around there, you look at the supply, and you look at the distribution. This is, of course, besides utility. Utility is the most important. But these three key components are essentially how people determine whether a token is worth investing in. So you look at the utility, you look at how the supply increases over time, you look at who those tokens are distributed to, and then finally you look at the incentives. Are the incentives that are built into the token likely to result in people holding the token? For example, staking. Staking is a good example. What that means is you lock up a certain amount of tokens and you're not able to spend that. And so the more tokens that are out of supply, by locking them up, the more the remaining tokens are worth in general. So that's some of the things that go into sort of deciding whether you want to invest in a cryptocurrency or not. What are the risks involved, right? A lot of people, I don't even need to get into it, but everybody, is concerned about cryptocurrency and scams. The first thing you want to do is, we have an acronym in our industry called DYOR, which is do your own research, right? So it's really, really important to read up everything you can about the company, look at where they're launching, what exchange they're launching on, what, let's say, launchpad they're launching on, and who are the companies that are backing it, right? So usually when you have a token, you have an investment round, and you might have institutional investors that come in on board to make an investment early on. And those institutional investors are the ones that are really able to make the connections for the company in terms of getting them on the right exchange, getting them the right hype that they need, getting them in the right media publications. So each investor will generally have a certain use case that the reason that they're on as one of the investors. So a lot of retail investors, they'll look at what these institutional investors are doing. What are the brands? So of course there's some really well-known institutional investors out there, and if you have these people on your cap table, you become that much more useful. Another thing to remember is that investment is not for everyone, particularly Web3 investment. It is a high-risk, high-reward sort of investment vehicle. You should definitely only invest what you can afford to lose. And this does not get said enough. A lot of people come in and they'll, stake their last little bit on a token, and then that token might be, end up crashing, and then that's the end of their entire life for a lot of people, right? So you should really only invest what you can afford to lose. The last piece of advice is sort of start with Bitcoin first. I always recommend this to people because if you are going to get into it, it's really better to get into it with something like Bitcoin, where you really understand what well, really, it's been around for 10 years. So you have a really good shot that it's going to be around maybe for another 10 years. So that's sort of a good place to go in, play around, see kind of how the whole system is put together, and then decide whether you want to be part of it or whether you know enough to then invest in altcoins or then even IDOs, which is what our business is. So a good example of what happens, I want to kind of end on a good note, right? So what are the opportunities when it comes to investment, right? So this is a really good example. This is a company I invested in. They had a really small amount of allocation remaining. Initially, they came to me, they said like $50,000, and we said we would take it because I was really convinced that the company would do really well. I immediately saw who their investors were, who their partners were, and I was like, this company is gonna really blow up. They said they had an extra $5,000 and did I want it? So you can see that over there. And I said, sure. I wasn't really sure what that would bring. But that $5,000 investment reached an all-time high of 1.4 million. The entire $55,000 investment ended up $14 million. So as an all-time high. So that's sort of what you can hope to gain if you do things right. So definitely try it and start off obviously with Bitcoin and then try and see where else it goes. So thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the talk. Sure.